welcome to the studio review for Chapter 18 on classes. We are going to practice writing a class to define an animal crew candidate, and we'll have all of the properties for that animal storing different values, and we're going to have name, mass, and scores will be an array of test results. So we'll be tracking these test results, and then what the test averages are, and then we're going to have a way ultimately to determine their status based on their test average. Have they been accepted into the program or reserved, probationary, rejected? And then towards the end, we'll kind of play around because poor Glad Gator here is not quite doing so well on his tests. But what if he was to start getting hundreds? How fast could we get him up to reserve status or up to accepted status? So lots of interesting things to do here that will give us some good practice. The code itself is in your JavaScript projects repo under classes and studio, and it's just a single file. So I've got that up here. We've got a few broad comments just to help us structure things, but we're going to do a lot of coding here. So we're really going to have to pay attention to these instructions. So part one is just to declare the class. We're going to call it crew candidate, and we need to give it a constructor that takes 3 parameters: name, mass, and scores. And scores will be an array, so we're going to keep that in mind. And then once we have the class defined, we can actually instantiate some objects for 3 different candidates based on that class. So let's go ahead and come over and do this. All right, let's use the class keyword and then give it a name, crew candidate. And remember that in JavaScript, classes are named with Pascal case, which is, kind of like camel case, but the very first letter is also capitalized. Okay, we're going to use the constructor keyword. This is a special kind of function that is given to a class that will run the very first time that an object is created from this class. So this is how we create the object with specific values, is to pass them in right when we're creating it. And now we can set the properties. So we'd like there to be 3 properties: this dot name, and we're going to let it take the value of the name that's passed in when it's created. We're going to have this dot mass, and we'll do the same thing. We're going to let it take the value of mass, and this dot scores will take the value of scores that as they're passed in. Okay, and I'll make the note here that this is going to be an array of numbers. Okay, so the next thing to do here is to create objects from these from this class, and make sure that we pass in these values for each of them. I'm going to do that kind of down here towards the bottom, because we have a lot of other code we're going to add before we really are able to do a lot of things. But just for the sake of creating the objects that we're going to work with, I'm going to put that here. So I'm just going to kind of mark this. This is still part of part 1. We're going to say, let's look at our people. We've got Bubba Bear and Mary Maltese and Glad Gator, and they each have their own values here that we can reference from here. So I'm going to just say, let's let Bubba be a new crew candidate. So that new keyword is important. We're saying we are creating an object based on this class, new crew candidate. And then we call the constructor that we defined and pass in those values to make sure that they get set for each of the properties that are defined in the class. We'll say 135. And then we're going to pass in these scores: 88, 85, and 90. Okay, and again, I got that information right from here. So we'll do the same thing for Mary Maltese and Glad Gator. I'm going to say let Glad, actually let's do Mary. I'm going to keep it in the same order. New crew candidate, Mary Maltese. 1.5 is the mass, and the test scores are 93, 88, and 97. Mary does pretty well. Okay. And then the last one is Glad That's a new crew candidate as well. Glad Gator. 225. The mass, and then this array of scores is 75, 78, and 62. Yeah. Glad's going to have to get his score averages up a little bit before he's going to qualify for the program. Okay, so let's go ahead and just print each of these to verify that they have the structure we expect them to have. So I'll say, let's do Bubba, and we'll have Mary and Glad. Okay. So down here, I am need to CD into classes/studio. And now I can see that I've got my file here. So I will node class studio, yes. And let me pull this up so we can see everything. Okay, we have 3 crew candidates, and it even marks it for us. It recognizes, you know, this is an object, but it's specifically an object of this class. So that's kind of helpful that it shows it to us this way. And we can see it has all 3 properties: name, mass, and scores. And that's that array that we passed in. So everything has been set properly. Our constructor worked the way that it was supposed to. And we now have 3 objects instantiated from the crew candidate class. So we can work with that. Let's go see what we're supposed to do next. Okay, part 2. We need a way to add new scores to their records every time the candidates complete more tests. So we're going to create an add score method that will actually be a method of the class. And we're going to let it take a new score as a parameter. We'll pass that in. And we do not want to put this inside the constructor. And if you, you know, want to remember kind of why we would do that, if you have something that is pretty much going to be exactly the same for every single object created from a class, there's no reason to store it with the object by putting it in the constructor. It is better to put it outside and just store it at the class level because it takes up less memory. Everything will be a lot more efficient. So we're going to create add score below the constructor. But every time we pass in a score using this method, it should just add that value to that array, this.scores, using push. And then we can test it out by adding a score of 83 to Bubba's record. And then we'll print out the entire array by going to Bubba's object and accessing the scores property. Okay. So let's come back up to the top here and below the constructor, but still inside the class definition. And I'm pointing this out because when I was a student, I would get confused all the time about this. Just pay attention to your brackets, pay attention to your indenting. It'll really help you in situations like this, be very clear on where it is you are in your code. So inside the yellow brackets here, you can see with the theme I've got, that's the entire body of the class definition. This is the entire body of the constructor. We are going below the instructor, still inside the class. And this is where we're going to define add score. Notice I don't use a function keyword. I don't need to. Within a class definition, it's understood that I am creating a function. So I can just name it and mark, this parameter, the score that needs to be passed in. And then I can access this.scores. It says, okay, go to the scores for this particular, whatever object is instantiated from crew candidate, go to their scores array and push the new score. There we go. Okay. So we can practice this. We'll come down here and so mark this as part 2. And let's just say Bubba.add score and pass in 83. And then we'll just console log Bubba's scores like this, access the scores that are stored as part of his object. All right, let's run it. Okay, and we see here, this array has been printed out here. It has the original 3 values, 88, 85, and 90, but we see the 83 has been added successfully. Great. Okay, we have more methods we want to write. we want to calculate the test average, and we also are going to determine the status. So let's take these one at a time. The test average is going to be as simple as just adding up all of the scores that are in that array and dividing by the number of scores. So it says it also wants us to round it to a decimal place and make sure that that value is returned from the function. Then we can verify it by evaluating and printing Mary's average test score, which should come out to 92.7 if we do it right. Okay, we'll come back over here, come up inside the class definition, and then after add score, but still inside that class definition, I will create average. And we do not need to have a parameter there because we're just going to be using data that we already have access to. So we can start by creating a variable that's going to track our sum. And of course, it's 0 until we start adding things to it. We'll do a basic for loop to go through this dot scores and go as many times as it has elements. And then increment by 1 each time. Okay. And then we'll just, do this accumulator method pattern, the accumulator pattern here where we say, sum plus equals, and then just add one more value to it. So we're going to go to this dot scores and get the whatever number is at index I as we traverse through this array of numbers. And then when it's done getting all of the scores out of that array and adding it to our sum, we can return the, actually, we don't want to return the sum. We want to return the average. Let's calculate the average. I'm just going to say let average equal the sum divided by this dot scores dot length. Okay. Now we can return the average, but we also need to round it. So I'm going to say math.round, and we want to round it to one decimal place, which means we need to multiply it by 10. So 10 times the average. And then after it's been rounded, we divide that 10 back out, and that'll give us the decimal answer that we're looking for. Okay, so let's come down here, do a part 3, and we will go ahead and log Mary's average. So we'll say, let's call that method on Mary. And remember that anytime you've got something that's a method, you have to use the parentheses to call it. Otherwise, you're just referencing it, and it's not going to do much for you. So this should actually return the average because we are calculating that here and returning that value from the method. Okay, let's run it. And we get 92.7. That was exactly what we were hoping to see. Perfect. All right, the next one is to determine the candidate status. So this is one of these ones where we're going to use some logic to check the range of values, whatever the average comes in. If it's above 90%, they're accepted. If it's 89%, they're reserved. 70 to 79% is probationary, and anything below that is just rejection. So we'll add that method called status. It will return a string that is one of those 4 words that represents the status. And we just have to, take in the, actually, we don't need to have a parameter because we can use our average function to get that average and just call it from there. So it reminds us we just have to use the this keyword because we're referring to something that's part of, the class from inside the class definition. And then once we have that, we should return that string, and then we can test it out on each of the 3 candidates and print this template literal here. Okay, so let's go work on this. We're going to come back up here, and below average, but still inside the class definition, I will create status. Okay. And the very first thing I need is the average, right? So let's go get the average. I'm just going to say, let's call this dot average and let it compute it for us, and then return that value and store it in this, and then we can use that here. So if the average is greater than or equal to 90, return accepted. else if average is greater than or equal to 80, we'll return reserve. And I don't really need to have the other end of this, the 80 through 89, because I've already established that anything other than anything 90 or above will already have hit this return, and the code isn't going to continue anyway. So we can just say anything greater than 80 at this point, because we've already ruled out anything higher than that. Okay, reserve, and then we'll say else if average is greater than or equal to 70. We want to return probationary. And then otherwise, so else, return rejected. Okay. That's it. We have everything being returned, and this is all mutually exclusive. So only one of those is going to get returned. So let's come down and try this out. So they give us this thing that they want us to test. I can copy this sentence here that we're supposed to be working with. And let's see here. Okay. No. So I could say console log and then put this in here. And I need to take off the single quotes because I'm actually just making it a template literal here. And we will put our placeholders here. So I'm going to do the placeholder syntax. And then inside there, I could do this for Bubba. So I could say Bubba.name for the name. And then here, do another placeholder and say Bubba.average and make sure I call it because I need to have the function execute and then return that value. And then again, here, same thing. I want to go to Bubba and say, Bubba.status and call that so that it can execute all of its code and return that string. All right, let's just try this once so we can see how it's going so far. It says Bubba Bear earned an average test score of 86.5% and has a status of reserve. Okay, now I could, go through here and, do this for Mary and say Mary.name, Mary.average, Mary.status, do the same here for Glad, Glad.name, Glad.average, Glad.status. But you may notice something. This is not dry code, right? This is pretty repetitive. So what do we do when we have something we want to do over and over and over again? We can loop. And you might think, well, how are we going to do that? Right now, we just have 3 objects that are separate, right? Well, the answer to that is we're going to put them in an array. So I'm going to create an array of candidates and just put all 3 of those objects in it, Mary and Glad. And then I will loop over that candidates array. So we'll go to candidates.length and increment by 1. And then we will do this console log, but this time, instead of naming a specific object, we're going to reference it through candidates and just say candidates at index I. And then we can see that being, done over and over again with a different candidate each time because it's going to do Bubba and Mary and Glad. So I'm going to comment this out because we should see all 3 of them show up now just because of this loop without having to do it this way. So let's run it again. And there we have it. Bubba and Mary and Glad each have those sentences because we looped over and we got their unique information from their object. And all of it is based on things that we did that we defined once in a class. And then because each of them have been created from this class, they have access to all of these things. So this is the beauty of classes. It allows you to do a lot with your data and, automate a lot of things. Okay. The last thing we want to do is to play around. Okay, so we said that, poor Glad Gator has a really low score. And we could see that in the printout. He's, probationary. So what would it take to get him up to reserve status? And, scores can't exceed 100%, but let's say he just really, really studied hard and he was able to get some hundreds. Like, how many tests would he have to take to get, to the next level, and so on and so forth. And, we could do this manually by continuing to add 100 and then check the average, and add 100 and check the average in the status. But we could also use a loop. So we're just going to take that approach from the beginning. All right. So I'm going to have a way to track, we're asking the question, how many tests will it take, right? So we have to have a way to track that. I'm going to say let test count equals 0. And then we can set up a loop. And of course, you remember that if we want to loop an unknown number of times, we want a while loop. So we'll just say while Glad's status is probationary, and it's going to evaluate this every single time it loops around. It'll keep checking his status. If it's still probationary, we need to keep going. Otherwise, it can exit the loop. So while we're looping, we'll say, okay, let's add a score of 100. Oops, not 1,000. That would be cheating. Okay. Add a score of 100 and then increment the test count. We just added another test. And so we're going to keep track of that. It's going to keep going until it's no longer probationary, and then we'll have that count. So we can, print out some sort of sentence that tells us how many tests it took. So I'll say console.log. It will take at least test count tests for GladGator to reach reserve status. Okay, let's run that and find out how many times it loops. And I have a typo. It will take at least 2 tests for GladGator to reach reserve status. Okay, so only 2 tests of 100 would get him up to reserve. So what about accepted? We could do this a little bit more, right? So let's copy this and paste it here, and we're going to change it to say, okay, he's at reserve now. So while he's at reserve, we'll keep adding more tests and see how long it takes to increase. And so then we'll just say it will take at least this many tests for him to reach accepted status. All right, let's run that. Okay, so it might take him 2 tests, but it would take 4 more. It'll take a total of 6 tests for him to get all the way up to accepted status. So that's a lot of tests, but if he studies hard, I believe in him. I think he can do it. All right, this was the end of the studio. Hope this was helpful. I'll see you in the next one.